Okay, let's do this for the pure motivation of leading all limitless Mother and Father sentient beings to the ultimate. So, on the spiritual path, our fundamental job is really clearing away ignorance. Ignorance is not seeing reality as it actually is. And the primary cause of all negative arisings is ignorance, as we've talked about in the past. So I'm going to talk about a particular kind of ignorance right now, today, and I hope it's helpful. So when I was a child, getting to know the world around me, I discovered that every once in a while somebody would do something bad to me, verbally or physically or in some way. And I knew absolutely for sure that they were doing a bad thing. It was their responsibility. They were doing it, no one else was doing it, no one was making them do it. And similarly, when something good happened to me, I knew for sure that that was my doing. You know, I did something good, I could take credit for it, and feel good about it, and so on. So I was pretty certain of both of those things, and they're both fundamentally based in delusion of how things really work. So the first clue for me was I had a phobia of dogs. And one night about midnight or thereabouts, I was walking in Vancouver, and there were two people in front of me, each about 100 yards in front of me, but I used to have incredibly excellent vision in those days, and it was a nice clear night, and there were street lights, and so I could see them both. And they walked the first one walked past a set of houses, nothing happened. The second one walked past a set of houses, nothing happened. I walked past that same set of houses, and the dogs inside the houses went nuts. They all started barking and wanted to get at me, you know. So what I was seeing, and I saw this pattern over and over, what I was seeing was that I was somehow contributing something that the other people weren't. They would walk by the same houses at the same hour of the night, on the sidewalk outside, and the dogs would react one way to them, and they would react completely differently to me. So that was a bit of a clue. In this particular life, when I was quite young, I was attacked by a dog, and that, of course, was the obvious cause of my phobia of dogs. That turned out to be complete delusion also. So after close to 20 years of meditation, I one day spontaneously had a past life memory. I don't guarantee that it wasn't a hallucination or an imagination or whatever, but it appeared to be a past life memory of my immediate past life. And I was born in 1943 toward the end of the year. So if I had a previous life, I would have died probably in the early part of 1943. And I was in one of the Eastern European countries. I'm pretty sure it's Poland. And there was an explosion at a German military base. The country was occupied by German soldiers. And I was about half a mile from the base, but within sight of it. And so when the explosion occurred, all kinds of soldiers rushed out of the base to look around and see who might be responsible. And so I knew that if they caught me, bad things would happen, and so I decided to run. I had nothing to do with the explosion, but I decided to run. And I had maybe a half a mile lead on them, and I was about 20 or 21, and I could run good. So I ran and ran and ran and ran. And so a group of soldiers were assigned to chase me down. And they couldn't catch me, so they went back and got dogs. And they got a fairly significant pack of mostly German Shepherd dogs. And they started tracking me, and so I had run down a path for a long ways, and then I had gone into the forest. And I was running through this forest. And eventually the dogs caught me long before the soldiers got there, and the dogs killed me. So when I remembered that, my phobia of dogs essentially went away, and I had once again discovered a truth that that was the cause of my phobia of dogs. Again, I was totally wrong, you know, but that sounded good for 10 or 15 years. And after about 15 years, I had another vision of what appeared to be a past life memory. And this was 3 or 4 centuries before the present time, and in that life, I was in a city that was surrounded by one of those armies like the Huns or the Goths or the Visigoths or whatever those people were. And it became apparent that no matter what we did, sooner or later they were going to come into the city and they could do whatever they want. They could kill, they could torture, they could do anything they want. And certainly they were going to steal everything, take everything. And there wasn't anything anybody could do about it. They were well trained, they were seasoned fighters, they had really good weapons. We were farmers or shopkeepers. We didn't have much in the way of weapons, and that we were outnumbered about 10 to 1. So, sure enough, they came in, and they didn't kill me right away. They tortured me for a long time, you know. What luck, you know. The Tibetans have a saying that in times of war, the luckiest person is the one who dies first. But I didn't have that luck, and they tortured me. And during that time, I developed a fierce, fierce, fierce hatred for these people coming in and just doing whatever they want. And at the end of that life, that fear went unconscious into my that hatred went into my unconscious as fear. Hatred, when you can't act on it and fight and defend yourself, it tends to freeze and very often turns into fear. So in my unconscious, I now had a fear of naked aggression. You know, they had been able to come in and do whatever they want. Dogs can do the same thing. They can come up and bite you. And there's probably not too much you can do about it, especially if you're Buddhist. You don't want to hurt them. And so now I thought I had really found the cause of my phobia of dogs. And I noticed that after that life, I was subject to lots of aggression by bullies, by animals, by adults, and that was this energy in me, based in unconscious fear, that was permitting this to happen. And it was that energy that permitted those dogs to kill me in my immediate previous life. And it was also that energy that allowed the dog to attack me when I was just 2 years old or something like that. So finally we've arrived at the core of it, right? Wrong. I also remembered a life, it's getting close to 900 years ago now, so 3 or 4 centuries or more before this life I just described. And in that life I was a religious person in the Christian tradition, and I had a teacher who appeared to be somewhat radiant and somewhat sanctified and highly respected by everybody. And I was taught by him. We had been childhood friends, so I had very good access to him until he died. And he was trying to teach me how to accomplish what he had accomplished. And I could see that he was on a level that was way, way, way beyond me. And so I would try to do the things he told me to do. But in that particular life, I happened to be an incredibly, incredibly happy person. And in my heart of hearts, I couldn't see any need for improvement. I was already so happy all the time. So I would try to practice, but I could never really get my heart into it. So I would go back to him and tell him what happened, and he would teach me again. And then he died eventually, and I outlived him by 20 or 30 years. So during those 20 or 30 years, I kept trying to do what he had told me to do. And gradually my mind changed what he had taught and started adding in some other things. In that time and place in Europe 800 or 900 years ago, everyone believed that the way to purification was through self-torture, self-mortification, things like that. That teacher had not taught that, but I somehow mixed that in with his teaching. And by the time I died, that was a very prominent part of what I believed he had taught. And it went unconscious as a negative driver, that the unconscious would believe that the more negative stuff happened to me, the more painful stuff happened to me, the easier it would be to give up attachments. And so ever since then, in every life, I have had lots and lots of really, really negative things, including being tortured and killed many times, and things like that. Yeah? And it was that negative energy that permitted me to be tortured and killed in the life 3 or 4 centuries ago, and allowed me in this life to be bullied and be bothered by dogs and bears and tigers and giant spiders and no end of friends, who can just come and do whatever they want. There's not much you can do about it, especially if you can't kill them, can't hurt them. So, and I also saw that prior to that life, 800 or 900 years ago, there would be some previous situation that would have allowed that to happen, and so on and so on. But having remembered all that, I realized I didn't need to keep going back infinitely in time. The thing was that I had got into this pattern of hating all these aggressive humans and animals that were doing things to me, and I had to stop that and put a stop to it. So There's a practice from the Dhammapada where the Buddha said, hatred by hatred never ceases. By love alone does hatred cease. So I made it my practice every day, quite a lot of time devoted to learning to love all of those beings that had harmed me, and to learning to wish them genuinely and sincerely the very best, to wish that they have happiness, to wish that they awaken. And it took me a couple of years before I could state my love for them and actually mean it, but I eventually was able to do it. And so the whole pattern broke. Now what I learned from that is that we are sort of like an energy field, and we may have things in our energy field that permit certain things to happen. If you're in a foul mood and sort of looking for a fight, and you go wandering around somewhere in a big city at night, you probably run into somebody else who has an energy field that allows you to interact in a negative way. I told the story a while ago about a friend of mine who in the past had a realization that if your being is in a state of yes, you enjoy things. If your being is basically saying no to whatever's there, you don't like it. And so when people like things and don't like things, they see a movie and they say, oh, that was a good movie. Well, it wasn't necessarily a good movie. It was just that you were in a state of yes toward that movie. Somebody else sees it, they're in a state of no. To them, it's a bad movie. So he decided to go into a state of yes for 6 months as an experiment in San Francisco in the early 60s. And so during that time, he was happy all day, every day, and wondrous, unimagined good things happened to him. And whenever he used to teach, and whenever he would talk about this in a teaching, somebody would always say, well, what would you have done if somebody said, let's go kill somebody? And he would get this mysterious smile and say, but they never did. Nobody suggested that. And what was happening was his energy field was completely positive. And so no one in a state of negative energy could come and interact in a significant way with him. He only attracted extremely positive energy. And so if he's in an extremely positive, happy state, and somebody comes along in a similar state, well then naturally they interact and really good things happen. Their whole beings are interested in happiness and wonder and joy, and that's what happened. That was his experience. So one might wonder what each of you might wonder, well, what is my energy field? And if you have a pattern where a particular kind of negativity happens to you and it doesn't seem to happen to others, then there's something in your energy field that's probably at least permitting that. And similarly, there's lots of things on the positive side too, you know. The first thing is, one should get rid of the delusion that when somebody does something negative to you, it's all they're doing, it's their fault, they're creating it. When in fact it's an interaction between their energy field and yours, and you are at least contributing permission for this to happen. So you can stop blaming everyone outside for anything negative that happens to you. You should realize that you at least contribute something to it. And a good practice actually would be to adopt the view, now this is a wrong view, but adopt the view that you're responsible for everything that happens to you. It's closer to the truth than the other way, where you blame others for what happens to you. And if you're responsible for everything that happens to you, you can fix things. If someone else is responsible for what happens to you, there's no hope, you know? I can't go around and tell every dog not to bite me and somehow fix that, you know? But if I'm responsible for it, then I can fix it, because I only have to work on myself. In Vajrayana, there's a deity called Guru Rinpoche, Padmasambhava. He lived about a little over 1,000, well, maybe closer to 1,200 years ago now. And he was a great, great master. And in Vajrayana, you can get the empowerment of Padmasambhava and do the mantra practice where you say his mantra, which is Om Ahum Vajraguru Pema Siddhi Hum. If you, in that mantra, Om refers to your body, Ah refers to your speech, Hum refers to your mind. Vajra is the unification of those three. Pema, which is the Tibetan pronunciation of the word, Sanskrit word for lotus, is your energy field. And the next word, siddhi, is the energy of that energy field. And Hum brings everything together at the end. So if you do that practice and say that mantra and emphasize the word Pema, it will bring you more in touch with your energy field, and it will tend to fix things in your energy field in the direction of being more wholesome, being an energy field that's more conducive to happiness, that's less conducive to pain and suffering. So one can actually do that practice and tune into that. And then if you do the practice and emphasize the next word, siddhi, which is the energy of that energy field, you can start to, number one, build up the energy in your energy field, but also transform it toward more wholesome, more good, more happiness, more positive, all of those sorts of things. So that would be one way to actually correct some of these things. I think we gave that empowerment a year or two ago. I don't remember when the last time was. But it could always be given again. So, you've probably all seen a situation where there's a room full of people and they're pretty happy and pretty light, and somebody in a really negative state comes in and sort of poisons the whole atmosphere, and pretty soon everybody's grumpy and negative. And you've probably all seen the opposite, where people are down and not in such a good space, and somebody really positive and happy comes in and lifts everybody up. The party pooper, or the life of the party, I suppose, would be the rough equivalent. So the first thing you could do, if you're interested, is you could try to start seeing how you affect other beings. Start paying attention to that. and start to see how other beings affect you. When you're feeling a little down or something less than positive, and you then meet with somebody, what happens? You know? What happens to them as a result of meeting you? What happens to you as a result of meeting them? This is a very eye-opening practice. Everybody knows that you know, if you're feeling a bit depressed and you go for a walk in beautiful nature on a sunny day, that sunny day, beautiful nature will tend to lift you up. And similarly, if you're happy and you go for a walk today, it might have the opposite effect, you know, especially if it gets more overcast. So one can observe this process of so what people don't realize is when you're in a negative state and you go walking through a beautiful park on a sunny day, you are affecting that environment with your negativity as much as the positivity of that environment is affecting you. And if you do something in a positive state, you are affecting whatever environment you're in the same way. For most people, most of the time, most of these occurrences go under the radar. People don't notice it. They just assume, you know, if you're feeling a little down and you come across somebody who's really happy, you'll probably just think, oh, what a nice person, or something like that, you know, rather than notice the flow of the energy. Similarly, you know, if you watch a movie or watch TV or listen to music or read a book, whatever is being portrayed in whatever it is you're doing can also affect you and affect your energy field. Whether you can affect it back, I don't know. But it's good to start noticing this interaction. In the 4 foundations of mindfulness, which is the fundamental practice in all of Buddhism, first you practice mindfulness of body. And then that naturally leads you to practice mindfulness of feelings. Feelings in the sense of sensory data. Stuff that comes to you through your senses, and you feel it in the sense of perceive it or notice it. And if you practice mindfulness of feelings, then you naturally become aware of the mind that reacts to that, that has formations related to that. You like something, comes to you through your senses, you like it, so the mind changes into a happier state. Something comes to you through your senses, the mind doesn't like it, you change to a more negative state. Those are the first 3 foundations of mindfulness. The 4th foundation of mindfulness in Sanskrit is Sarva Dharma. Sarva means all, and Dharma the word Dharma has many meanings, but in this context, it simply means things. So your mindfulness is then extended to all things, which means everything outside of yourself, your relations to everything outside of yourself, your reactions to everything outside of yourself. So what we're talking about today really is part of the 4th foundation of mindfulness, seeing how you affect what's around you, and how what's around you affects you. And if you go deeply into this, you will really discover that it's almost impossible for someone to do something negative to you if your energy field is completely positive. And similarly, it's very easy for somebody to do something negative to you if your energy field is predominantly negative. Eventually, then, you can actually perceive the field. The field, for most people, is a little bit smaller than this tent. You know, like maybe 10 feet on every side. It doesn't actually end there. Theoretically, it's endless, but in terms of having significant force and power, it's maybe something like that size. It could be smaller, it could be bigger, I don't know. Does anybody here see auras? You do? Yeah. So that's highly related to that. I don't see auras, so I don't know that much about it. But people who see auras see some manifestation of energy outside of the body. And can you tell much from the auras? Can you?
Mostly I feel.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mostly, if I see a certain aura, it sends a certain energy about the human. So a certain energy about the human.
Yeah.
And really correlates to what you were just saying about with someone coming into a room and you've got generally good energy, good I don't know, continuity going on, and then someone comes in with an aura that is dark or gray or whatever, the whole room's it's you can feel it like it.
Right.
Yeah.
So for those who can see auras, they can see what's happening with the energy of somebody really quite easily. But for the rest of us, it takes a little more tuning in. And I would suggest that if you learn to tune into it, it becomes easier and easier and you get more and more information. I have the subjective experience frequently of getting all kinds of information from seeing somebody that I don't know that I'd probably rather not get. People will be perhaps living their life based on some fundamental delusion, and one looks at them and perceives that, and it's sort of sad and really information I'd rather not have, but it seems to come sometimes, eventually on the path, one has to come to understand energy flow in many, many deep ways. So for example, if you're in a good state of mind and you meet somebody in a negative state of mind, energy flows. And one eventually needs to become aware of these things quite a bit more than we generally are right now. I was meditating this week, and all of a sudden something popped into my mind from Christianity, and it was something. It's the wording is different in the different translations, but it's that teaching in Christianity To he that has, it shall be given. To he that doesn't have even that, it shall be taken away. Something like that. And that's really referring to this, you know. If you are wealthy and have the energy field of a wealthy person, you get wealthier. To you who has, it's given. If you're going around pretty much mostly in a state of anger, then from time to time you'll run into somebody else and anger will be given back to you. So to he who has anger, more anger will be given. People who have great poverty, very often in their energy field is a type of greed that tells them, at least unconsciously, the more they can take and steal and get away with, the better things will be for them. But what that does to your energy field is sets you up to have things taken away from you. And there's a great story, one of the very early Chinese masters in about 400 AD, 400 or 500 AD, that approximate time frame. He was a child monk living at a monastery in a remote part of China, and there wasn't much local support, so they had to grow their own food. So they had a big garden, and one day the monks were out working in the garden, and a gang of bandits came along, and they had weapons and so on, and so all the monks ran back into the monastery for safety, and the thieves started taking stuff from the garden. And this little Chinese master, but in the form of a child, he was about 8 or 9 years old, he walked right up to them. He didn't run back to the monastery. He walked right up to them and said, you can take this, you can take whatever you want, if you want, but you should know that it's that pattern of taking that is keeping you poor and will make you much poorer in the future. And then he turned and with great dignity marched back into the monastery. So all of the thieves pondered that for a while, and they all set down their weapons and they went into the monastery and asked to be able to live there as monks, and were accepted. So one of the things that used to bother me when I used to watch movies and so on was, like when I was a child, we used to go to the movies every Saturday afternoon, and it was mostly westerns, and the good guy would always wind up killing the bad guy, and then the next week, at the beginning of the next one, he would just be a normal person with a happy family life and so on, and then he would kill somebody else. And the next week he would still just be a normal person, a normal family, happy family life and loving and all these things. And it just couldn't be, you know. You can't kill the bad guy every week and not be changed. It just doesn't happen that way, you know. And that's another way to study energy transference between beings, is to, if you, I'm not saying watch movies, I'm not saying watch TV, but if you are going to watch a movie or watch TV, possibly even a book, you can sort of pay attention to the energy transfers between the various characters, and decide whether they're realistic or not. You know? There was one point in my life I used to watch the TV program Friends, and every once in a while they would have an episode where one of them would be absolutely horrible to one of the other ones. But the next week everything was perfect, you know. It was just not realistic in that sense. You can't do really, really horrible things to somebody and then so it just somehow disappears, you know, because you're friends. It just does. Life isn't like that. You do something really horrible to somebody, there's a formation. That formation doesn't go away until the two of you find some way to make it go away, which usually is through love. And it's often not easy to do because people cannot attain the state of positivity required for something like that to dissolve. If you had a neighbor that you didn't know very well and you nod at each other and wave hi whenever you see each other, and then one day you go over there and shout obscenities at that guy and insult him and criticize him, and then the next day you come out and just wave expecting everything to be normal, it's not going to be that way. There will be a formation that will persist indefinitely unless something is done to cause it to go away. So one should consider all the various possibilities of how when you have something, you get more, and when you don't have something, then somehow things are taken away. It applies to so many aspects of life. I was going to sit down and try and make a list, but I mean it's practically everything, so I didn't do it. So, each one of you is a bundle of energy, and each one of your energy fields is driven by unconscious delusions, such as the one I had, which was the more negativity I experience, the more pain I experience, the worse things get, the easier it will be to give up attachments. It doesn't work. You know, the Buddha taught that in the first sermon. It was common belief in India at the time of the Buddha that fasting and self-mortification and so on were the way to purification, so he did that for quite a few years. And he did it to an extreme that probably no human has ever done before, and it just didn't work. Eventually he decided it weakens the body and it weakens the mind, and it doesn't work. 3 strikes and you're out, you know. And so he gave that up. So these unconscious drivers cause us to often to waste this precious opportunity of a human life in order to awaken. I had a friend who heard the Dharma, this is 50 years ago, knew it to be true, knew one had to follow the path and awaken. But he had an unconscious driver that you could find someone who would do it for you. you could find a great teacher who could share his grace with you or something, so you didn't actually have to do the work. And so he left the fully enlightened teacher that he was with and went and found teachers who promised that they would do it for him without him doing anything. So he wasted that opportunity. The last time I had contact with him, which is now maybe 10 years ago, it was my impression he hadn't really got anywhere in this life. In worldly life, I had some friends who were very wealthy. By very wealthy, I mean net worth in the range of $10 million or more. And they worked 16 hours a day, every day of the year, including Christmas, to make more money. Because they had some unconscious driver that told them that's the way to happiness. More money, more money, more money, more money. In the meantime, they couldn't enjoy it. And I had another friend who, both he and his wife were driven to make money after they were rich, having worked every day of the year for, I think 30 years approximately, never taking a day off, never having a vacation. Finally, the wife insisted on a vacation. And so they decided to fly to Disneyland for a weekend, you know. I mean, this is a real vacation, an entire weekend in Disneyland, you know. And so it was left to the husband to make the travel arrangements. And he found a bargain hotel near Disneyland that had a room that hardly anybody would rent, so it was offered really cheap. And so he rented it. The bathtub was filled with toilet waste. But the room was very cheap.
Yeah.
A heck of a vacation, you know. So people who are driven to make incredible amounts of money often lack the capacity to reap the rewards of having money. They either can't take time off, or when they do, they don't want to spend any money. I haven't known too many wealthy people, and some of the wealthy people I know are not particularly driven to make more, and they do enjoy the money they have, so they don't have that fixation of more, and don't spend anything. But I have met quite a few of those who are driven, and sometimes they even know they're driven, but they don't know what's driving them, and they don't have any way of undoing it, so they spend all their life working, you know. I worked with a guy who wasn't wealthy, but he had a driver to be wealthy, and so he would work all day at a day job. He would pick up any other kind of work that he could, and he would always arrange his vacation at a time where he could get a temporary job somewhere, you know, and he didn't strike me as having the capacity to enjoy life much. It was as if somewhere in his unconscious it was saying, well, make lots of money and then you can be happy. Yeah? But not now. So what's driving you? What's going on with you? keeping you from being at peace. Drivers are one thing that keeps us from being at peace. These people that are driven to make money can't just simply stop and be at peace. When I was driven by creating more and more misery, I could not stop and just be at peace. So one would do well to sort out what's driving you and thus acquire the ability to remain at peace. Awakening happens when the depth of your being, your entire being without a single cell against it, prefers peace over anything else. If there's a little part of you that thinks, oh, well, if only we had enough excitement in our life, or only we had enough possession in our life, or only we had enough variety in our life, or something like that, you won't prefer peace over anything else, because there's a delusion in there that something that is not peace is going to make you happy. True, deep happiness that does not depend upon circumstances, it comes from peace. It comes from resting in peace and preferring that to anything else. Happiness that's conditional, like if I have this much money I'll be happy, or if I have this possession, or if I get to go there then I'll be happy. That kind of happiness is transient. It doesn't last. It can't last. Therefore, it's really not pursuing when there's an alternative of deep, deep happiness that wells up from inside, that is not created by anything and not dependent on anything, and is still there even when things are going really bad. So what's driving you? One thing that might be driving you is the desire to awaken. And that's actually okay. It's the one driver that's temporarily okay. That driver will prevent you from awakening, but in the normal course of walking the path, that driver normally falls away on its own sometime a little bit before enlightenment. So it doesn't usually need to be fixed. And if it isn't there, you aren't going to do what's needed to awaken. Namdak Rinpoche used to say, craving for enlightenment is the path. You need to have a strong, strong, strong desire to awaken. And that desire eventually will be an impediment, but it will take care of itself most of the time. In Zen, there's a saying that in order to awaken, you need to want awakening as bad as a drowning man going down for the third time wants air. Desperation, urgency. And those sound like negative things, but they're essential on the path. If you don't want it, it won't happen. It doesn't happen by accident. If you really want it hard and for a long time, then it might happen by accident. But it won't. But wanting it a lot is a necessary foundation, and wanting it soon is a necessary foundation. If you're going to get enlightened in 500 lifetimes, that's probably not good enough. The Buddha used to describe lack of urgency to awaken as a fault. So yes, we're Buddhists and we think desire is somewhat suspicious, but in this case, we need to have that desire. We need to want to awaken, and we need to want to awaken by Tuesday at the latest. The difference between me and the rest of Namgyal disciples was that when I first met him, I wanted to awaken by next Tuesday. And nobody else had any such thought as that. And the result was that I had the first stage of awakening that same year, the same year I met him. And I don't know any other of his disciples that had any awakening for at least 10 years. And it wasn't because I was a good meditator. I was a terrible meditator. But I wanted the result right now. And that turned out to be what works. If you don't have urgency to awaken, you should contemplate death. That will create it. Death is coming. It might seem unreal. It might seem like something that only happens to others. But in fact, one day you will die. And what happens after that, in terms of actual knowledge, you don't really know. You can read what Padmasambhava said happens after death in the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But there's, 500 or 1,000 or 100,000 different versions in other traditions, and everybody is certain that they know what happens after death. But it's really just based on who you choose to believe, in terms of what you actually know for yourself. Unless you remember dying last time and what happened after that, then otherwise you can't really say that you know what happens after death. So why wait for that? Why take a risk? Wake up now. Should we all try really hard to wake up right now? I don't know if you have to clench your fists or not. Couldn't hurt,
Can I ask a question?
Of course.
You say that out of all your teacher's disciples, you wanted to be awakened right away. What was the process or the stages like for you?
What was what?
What were like the process or the stages like for you for getting that first part of awakening? Like you said you wanted to what did you do?
So he had a meditation retreat booked for July and August of that year. I met him in February, and I went and asked him whether that 2 months was long enough to get enlightened in. And I kept asking until he finally said yes. And then I made a plan that it was July and August. I made a plan that I would get enlightened by the 3rd week of July, because I knew that enlightenment meant going beyond suffering, and then if it was really hot in August, I wouldn't suffer, or if there were a lot of bugs, which there were. So we did the retreat, and he canceled it after 10 days, and he said that there isn't a single one of you here who can meditate. If there was even one, I would keep going, but there isn't a single one. So I knew that applied to me, If he said there's only one of you who can do it, well then I would have thought maybe that's me, So I went back to Toronto completely crushed because I wasn't going to make it by the 3rd week of July. And I couldn't meditate, so I contemplated what to do. And I decided, since I was no good at meditation, that the best thing for me would be to practice mindfulness 24 hours a day as best I could. And so I developed a practice of mindfulness of body where all day, every day, I watched my body, I watched it reach, I watched it grab things, I watched it walk. And I got a job in a warehouse where I had to walk around and fill orders, and so I practiced the mindfulness extremely diligently all day, every day, and I kept it going when I left work, and I started it first thing in the morning. So I practiced mainly mindfulness of body. That led to mindfulness of feelings, mindfulness of mind, mindfulness to things around me. And it progressed me through the stages of insight. So the first thing that happened was you reach stage 4, which you realize there must be something. You don't know what it is, you don't know where to find it, you don't know what it would look like if you did find it, but you have to go for it and you can't go back. So I reached that stage by practicing mindfulness clumsily. And then what happens is if you practice mindfulness, it's difficult at first, but then your mind settles down a little bit and you start to experience some very pleasant things, like you might see lights, or you might have visions, or you might have bliss or something like that. So my pleasant things were definitely muted, but I started to have them. And I didn't know about the stages of insight, but I was practicing this and I started to feel a bit better. Then as you practice mindfulness and you begin to see what's going on in the mind, you realize that it's extremely complicated. Everything seems to be connected to everything else. Memories are connected to emotions, which are connected to thoughts, of the patterns of thoughts that arise, and everything. You look into the mind and you see this great tangle, and that's what the Buddha called it, the tangle. And you realize that you're glad that someone else could untangle the tangle, but for me there was no hope. It was just going to be too difficult, and so you try to give up. And if you're in a meditation retreat, it's called the rolling up the mat and going home stage. You roll up your bamboo mat and go to the teacher and say, well, I'm glad you're teaching this, I'm glad people are doing it, but I can't do it, I'm leaving. And the teacher reassures you it's just the stage and tells you to keep going. So I tried to give up, but I couldn't, because I knew I couldn't go back. There was just no options for me. So reluctantly I kept going forward. Now we're about, I started this in July of '67, now we're say in August. So then you enter, up to this point you're in what's called the path to the path. The path begins when you realize, even though it's going to be impossible, you have no choice but to go ahead and try to do it. And so reluctantly you move forward and you confront this great tangle of emotions and thoughts and memories and all of this stuff, and thoughts arising and you don't know where they're coming from and all of this. And you look into it, and the more you look into it with your mindfulness, two things happen. One is hope fades. They call it hopelessness, but it's not hopelessness, it's lack of hope. Slightly different. And so hope faded. And as hope fades, despair sets in, because you're in an intolerable state of life. There's no hope of going back, there's no hope of going forward. So in Zen they describe this as a man who tries to swallow a red-hot ball of iron and he gets stuck in his throat. He can't swallow it, he can't spit it out, and he can't stand it. That's pretty much what your life is like, So I looked hopelessly into this tangle, and despair just kept increasing. Hope kept fading, and I didn't like where I was. This takes us to about September. Sometime around September, I was in total despair, total lack of hope, and I looked into this tangle and I recognized a pattern that I had seen before. So a bit of interest developed. That's the end of the 10th stage, the beginning of the 11th stage. What happens in the 11th stage is through interest, you start to become more comfortable with where you are. Despair is still total, hope is still totally absent, but at least when you're looking into the tangle, you're starting to recognize patterns and, oh, I've seen that before, and oh, the last time that happened, this happened, and it happened that way again, We're over time, so during that stage, you gradually develop the 7 factors of enlightenment because you gradually come to be okay with being in total despair. Even if it lasts forever, even if there's absolutely no hope, you become totally okay with it. And the interest creates investigation. Being okay with it creates equanimity, and your mindfulness keeps improving because of interest. At the end of the 11th stage, you reach the point where if in the depth of your being has had enough, you're willing to take a leap into the unknown. At that time, despair is total. You no longer care at all about trying to get rid of it. You don't want to fix it. On the night of the realization, I was living in a house with friends, and for 2 or 3 months, every night they had found something that was sure to get me out of my despair. One night it was nut loaf. Nut loaf doesn't work, but it was really good. And so they were trying to fix me because they cared about me. And so on the night it actually happened, they came up with a plan to fix me, and I said, no, this is not fixable. Nothing is going to fix it. Stop trying. And I also completely stopped trying. I was totally okay with it being there forever. Concentration was essentially perfect. Energy was essentially perfect. All of these things that had been created during the 11th stage. And I tried to go to bed and I couldn't, so I got up. Everybody else in the house was up. They were sitting in the kitchen. We sat there. I went and sat. We sat in silence for about an hour, from about 2 a.m. to 3 a.m. Not meditating, just nobody saying anything. And finally a woman said to me, so what's the problem? And what's wrong? And I said, well, everything is wrong. And I'm not even sure of that. And she said, that's it. And I said, what? And she said, what did you say first? Everything is wrong. And she pointed at me and sat up and said, that's the problem. What did you say next? And I'm not even sure of that. And she said, and that's the solution. And at that moment, awakening happened, and I was flooded with bliss. It filled the entire house and the entire neighborhood. And I eventually couldn't stand being in the house anymore, so I went out and walked. And I came to a dark alley. There's some very long alleys in downtown Toronto. And there was a dog barking in the alley, and I was in this just absolute state of total positivity, full of bliss, and I decided to go down and meet this dog at 3 o'clock in the morning on his turf, in his alley, because I absolutely knew for sure that dog would love me and I would love that dog. But he disappeared. I didn't meet him. I just walked through the alley. No fear, absolutely no fear, just total bliss, total clarity, which lasted for days, and I acquired a new ability. In downtown Toronto, there's some very old stone churches, and I had to walk by one to go to work. So in the morning when I was walking to work, I noticed that there appeared to be 3 angels living in the sky above the church. So I waved at them, and they looked down really surprised, and they waved. So we did that every day for a week or 2, and then after that I lost the ability. I couldn't see them anymore. I'd still sometimes wave, but I was really faking it. So mindfulness body will create all the other forms of mindfulness. Mindfulness will take you through the stages of insight, guaranteed to the leaping point, the jumping point. Whether you jump or not depends on whether your being has made up its mind that there's no alternative. If your being still has some secret plan for how you're going to get happiness in the world, it won't take the leap. But if you're ready, it will take the leap. And I was ready. I don't think it was a Tuesday, but you don't get everything you want. So it took about 4 or 5 months from that time in July when I found out I couldn't meditate.
I thought that story was like, that story itself was kind of, was uplifting.
How long had you been meditating before that happened?
Lifetime total, maybe an hour.
In your whole life?
Yeah, because I couldn't meditate. I would sit down to meditate, and I could only meditate for a minute or 2, and then I would stop. So I'd been trying for a couple of months to meditate, but I hadn't even got up to 5 minutes yet. I couldn't do it. I couldn't stand it. I mean, I was really in a messed up negative state. Meditating is spending time with yourself. Who would want to do that? I'd rather go find somebody else and spend time with them. But it was, I was so messed up actually that some of the other disciples in that lineage used to say, well, if you ever make it, it's really good news for humanity because that means anyone can make it. And nobody, including me, thought it would be possible. We're over time. Any last questions before we stop?
Well, I just sort of, the one thing I was wondering, like when you were talking about, both people being part of a negative energy.
Talking about what?
Both people contributing to a negative interaction. So once you become aware of that and you try as hard as you think that you can to resolve that, but it still continues on, do you just walk away or?
Well, see what happens normally is that there's a negative interaction. You blame the other person, they blame you. You go away with hard feelings. Nobody gets anywhere, The first thing is to realize that that you're at least contributing to it, and therefore it's mainly your responsibility. And you can work on yourself. So the first thing that will happen is that if you're in a negative state of mind and you're aware of it, and somebody else who's negative comes along, you can choose to just walk away right now. And that's what I did, Why, when there's a potential for something bad, why hang around, But as you become more and more aware of what's going on with you, then if you find that there's a lot of anger and hatred in your energy, then you can practice loving kindness or Chenrezig or something that's going to change that, you know. If there's a lot of dullness in your mind and you know you're negative, you know your energy field is somehow messed up, but you don't know what's going on, then you could practice Manjushri that, well, his sort of wisdom will cut right to the core and show you what's going on. And once you see, those things fall away. And so on. You know, if there's a lot of greed and desire, there's practices for that. Whatever it is, you can start to work on it. You know? Initially, it's basically clean it up, and when it gets clean enough and you see it for what it is, it falls. The negatives fall away on their own. You don't really have to get rid of it. Okay? Let's dedicate any merit from this and from all sources and times to all beings, that each without exception attain the ultimate for themselves.
Thank you. Thank you.